If you read just one book this year, make it this one. Most people spend years making mistakes that could be completely avoided in just 10 minutes. In this video, we're unlocking the core lessons from Blood Nor Money by Colette Rhodes, 2,000 years old, immune to death, and still running from the one thing she can't outlive, love. That's the trap at the center of Blood Nor Money, and it's the reason this book hooks readers who think they've seen every vampire romance trope before. This isn't a story about whether the heroine will fall for the brooding immortal. It's a story about a woman who has already decided, centuries ago, that falling in love is the most dangerous thing she could ever do, and what happens when three men refuse to accept that answer. Let's break down what actually makes this story work, because it's smarter than it looks on the surface. The setup: a queen who refuses her own crown. Portia Catonis has been alive for 2 millennia. She runs a burlesque club in London under an assumed identity. She feeds on willing humans, and she has built an entire life around one non-negotiable rule: never trust men. Not flirt with them, not fear them, never trust them. That distinction matters because Portia isn't cold. She's generous, funny, protective of the women who work for her, and she still enjoys pleasure without guilt. What she has locked away isn't her body. It's her heart. The story kicks into gear when a rival vampire faction, led by a self-styled tyrant calling himself the Imperator, starts encroaching on her territory, burning down her home, and making it very clear he wants her as a trophy wife. To survive, Portia has to finally acknowledge the 2 ancient vampires who have secretly guarded her for centuries from a distance, plus a third wildcard who crashes into her life mid-crisis. Suddenly, the woman who has spent 2,000 years avoiding intimacy is sharing a house, and eventually a bed, with 3 men who have all, in their own ways, been in love with her since before she knew they existed. That's the engine of the book. Not, will she fall for him, but how do you convince someone who has already died once for love that loving again won't kill her a second time? Lesson 1. Her walls aren't random, they're a survival strategy. A lot of romance heroines have vague trust issues that exist just to create tension. Portia's are different because they're built on something specific and devastating, which the book slowly peels back layer by layer. As a mortal Roman woman, she was so desperate to prove her devotion to her husband that she mutilated her own leg to hide pain from him, just to demonstrate loyalty. When he died, her grief was so total that she took her own life to follow him. She was saved, turned into an immortal, against her will, by a stranger who pitied what she'd become. That backstory reframes everything. Portia's rule about never trusting men isn't about fearing betrayal. It's about fearing herself, what she's capable of when she loves someone completely. She's not protecting her heart from being broken, she's protecting the world from what she becomes when it is. That's a genuinely compelling psychological hook, because it flips the usual romance formula. The obstacle isn't a bad man in her past. It's the terrifying knowledge of her own capacity for self-destruction. This is why every time one of her 3 suitors pushes past her defenses, the tension isn't just, will she let herself be happy? It's, will she trust herself not to repeat the worst decision she ever made? Lesson 2. 3 very different kinds of devotion. The 3 men orbiting Portia aren't interchangeable romantic options. Each represents a different relationship to obsession, and that variety is what keeps the dynamic from feeling repetitive. Calvus is the oldest, the one who has loved her since they were both mortal, back when he was enslaved in her household and she never knew he existed. His love is quiet, sacrificial, almost self-erasing. He gave up his human life specifically to watch over her from a distance for centuries, expecting nothing in return. That's beautiful, and also, the story makes clear, a little unhealthy. He's spent 2,000 years defining his existence entirely around protecting someone who didn't know his name. Part of his arc is learning that loving Portia can't mean disappearing for her. Louis is younger, hot-tempered, and far less patient about hiding his feelings. Where Calvus watches from the shadows, Louis wants acknowledgement, wants to be chosen out loud. His jealousy and impulsiveness create a lot of the book's friction, but underneath the swagger, his fear is simpler and more relatable. He's terrified of loving someone who will never say it back. Then there's the newcomer, a reclusive ancient vampire who literally tackles Portia into the mud the night her home burns down. He's unpredictable, a little unhinged from centuries of isolation, but he's also the one character who refuses to see the other two as competition. He assumes from the start that all four of them belong together, which sounds absurd until you realize he's the only one brave enough to say what everyone else is too scared to admit. Together, these three don't just represent romantic interest, they represent three different responses to loving someone who won't let you close. One disappears, one demands, one simply insists. And Portia has to learn to accept all three kinds of love without collapsing back into the version of herself that once destroyed her own life over a single man. Lesson 3. The villain is the past, literally. Here's where the book takes its smartest swing. The antagonist hunting Portia isn't some random power-hungry vampire. He's revealed to be her actual dead husband, the man she killed herself over, now an immortal tyrant obsessed with reclaiming her as property. It's a bold structural choice, because it means the external threat and the internal wound are the exact same person. Portia can't defeat this villain without also confronting the trauma that built her walls in the first place. When she finally faces him, what's striking is how the book handles it. She doesn't fall back into old patterns of appeasement. She sees him clearly for what he always was, a man who valued her as an ornament, not a partner, and she rejects him outright, even while injured and outnumbered. That confrontation becomes the emotional turning point of the entire story, because it's the first time Portia chooses herself over the fear of consequences. She finally says out loud what she spent 2,000 years unable to admit even to herself, that she loves the men who have earned it, and that love doesn't have to mean self-destruction. Lesson 4. Trust is rebuilt through action, not declaration. One thing this book does well is refuse to let words alone fix anything. Portia doesn't just decide one day to trust these men because they say the right things. Trust gets rebuilt through repeated action, through them respecting her boundaries even when it costs them, through choosing her safety over their own pride, through showing up for each other even when jealousy is eating them alive. When the climax hits and she's captured and tortured, it's not a grand romantic speech that saves her. It's three men independently risking everything, coordinating despite their rivalry, refusing to leave anyone behind. That's the proof she needed, not promises, but consistent action under real pressure. This is honestly a solid takeaway for storytelling in general, and even for real relationships. Declarations are cheap. What actually rebuilds broken trust is watching someone behave the same way when it's inconvenient as when it's easy. Lesson 5. Healing looks like choosing vulnerability on purpose. By the end, Portia doesn't become a different person. She's still sharp-tongued, still fiercely independent, still someone who'll threaten a man's testicles with a dagger without blinking. What changes is that she stops treating vulnerability as a threat to be neutralized and starts treating it as a choice she's allowed to make. She says, "I love you," not because her walls magically vanished, but because she decided, deliberately, that the risk was worth it. That's a more mature version of a romance arc than simply, she falls in love. She chooses love with her eyes open, fully aware of what it once cost her, and decides to try anyway. The takeaway: strip away the fangs and the burlesque stage, and Blood Nor Money is really about the terror of loving again after love once nearly destroyed you, and the slow, deliberate work of learning that trust isn't naive, it's brave. Portia's 2,000 years of self-imposed isolation didn't protect her from pain. It just delayed the reckoning. The book's real argument is that walls built from old wounds don't keep you safe forever. Eventually, someone patient enough, or reckless enough, or simply persistent enough, will make you choose between the fortress and the life waiting outside it. If this summary saved you hours of reading and gave you real value, hit the subscribe button right now. Leave a comment below letting us know which book you want to see next. And if you want to keep growing your mind, click the video appearing on your screen right now. See you in the next 10 minutes.